Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this day, and we're thankful that we can get online on Zoom. We know yesterday there was difficulties, technical difficulties for many people throughout the world, and I'm thankful that we made it on yesterday as well. We ask for your Spirit to teach us as we continue in our study of Ezekiel. And we ask, Lord, that we can understand, understand the things we study. I ask that you can guide this study, that it can be according to thy will, and that these things will be useful in revealing a Christ-like character. Help us to understand these difficult things, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Excuse me there with my throat. So as you can see behind me, this was the study from yesterday, and I'm just going to go over it briefly. So when we had looked at Ezekiel chapter 1, starting on verse 4, we have this description of these four living creatures that are seen by Ezekiel. And I made a contention that the translations of, and almost every translation, any of the old translations definitely translate Ezekiel chapter 1 as that they have four faces, that each of these creatures has four faces, and they all contain the same four faces. And in looking at the Hebrew and trying to decide regarding this, I've come to the conclusion that they don't have four faces. Now, I could be wrong. So, it's just the way that, I think that it should be translated based upon the Hebrew. And that's something that's a contention. Now, part of the reason why translators translate the way they do, especially in the past, is you're building upon a tradition, and part of that tradition goes back to the Septuagint and how they translated Ezekiel chapter 1. It's very difficult language. That is, when you're translating something that's being described like this in Ezekiel, it's hard to know what you're looking at. If it's something familiar, then it's an easier translation. So so the view that I take is obviously a minority position. And it has to do with when we get to chapter 1, verse 6, and everyone had four faces and everyone had four wings. And I'm saying that what it says in the Hebrew is, and of the four, they had faces, and of the four, they had wings. So it's just saying that all of these creatures had faces and they had wings. And these are particular characteristics of them. And then it's going to go on and describe, other parts of them. Their feet, they're straight feet, so they have straight legs, and they have calves, hooves, calf's foot, right? So they have a cloven hoof, and it describes their color. And they have the hands of the man under their wings on their four sides. So obviously, when it says their four sides, that would then be, it doesn't really make much sense the way that they're describing it in the King James. And if you look at the Hebrew, they four on their sides. So it's just saying that all four of them have these same characteristics. That's what's trying to be described in the Hebrew. So all four of them had arms or hands under their wings. So they would have this body of a man, but they have legs, or the lower part like a calf, and they all have wings, and under their wings they have arms, so they have hands, man's hands. And then it's going to say that their wings are joined together, one to another, so that they're somehow connected in what he sees. And And then it talks about them turning not when they go, or when they went, they did not turn, but everyone went straight forward. And we're not really sure what that means, because what kind of direction of movement is it being talked about? And I guess I can bring this passage up here, just what I'm reading. And then in verse 10, let's do this again. In verse 10, and it says, as for the likeness of their faces, they four had a face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side. So this is again translated in a certain way or understood in a certain way. If you believe that they all had four faces, then you would say, well, on the right side of their head, they have a face of a lion and a face of a man. And then and it says they four had the face of an ox on the left side, and then it says they also had the face of an eagle. Now, so this is one of the difficult parts of this passage. And so we know that what he's seen here is also described in John chapter 4 and in Isaiah chapter 6, though with some differences.
Revelation chapter 4.
Revelation chapter 4, yes. Revelation chapter 4, Isaiah chapter 6. And then we also laid out from Numbers chapter 2, the tribes of Israel around the camp, around the sanctuary, with the Levites in the center and then the different tribes. And then based on Jewish tradition, or they have this idea that there's these standards, and we know that the standards, it talks about these standards or banners, but it doesn't in the Bible tell you what's on these banners. So that's something that goes beyond the Bible, but it's pretty well accepted by most people, most scholars and Bible students, that what's on the standards are the ox, the eagle, the man, and the lion, and where they're placed. So we're going to look at that. And that's what we have here in verse 10, is we have, for the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man, right? And the face of a lion. But it says on the right side. Now that word that's translated as right side is from a Hebrew word that means south. Now it's kind of the opposite, or that we have in English. Because we say somebody's a southpaw, that means he's left-handed. But here in Hebrew, this word, the right hand, it means locally south, right hand side or south. And I don't know why they have left-handed there in this Strong's Concordance here. But the right hand or side, leg, eye of a person or other object. But that's because it's on the north, or on the south, pardon me. So it's on the south side. And so right-handed. Let me see, am I doing this right? I might be reading this wrong. I might be getting it mixed up. Right side. So the right-hand side of the person or other object has the stronger, more locally, the south. And then it says dash plus left-handed. Right-hand side, south. Yeah. So I don't know why they put left-handed in there, because it would be right-handed. So anyway, it's on the south side. And then when we have the word left, the left side, it's this other Hebrew word, which means north. So the north refers to the left hand, and the south refers to the right hand. And so they could have easily translated this as directions. And so if we look at what happens so I'm going to unshare the screen here. So when we look at this layout here, we have this south and this east, but according to Ezekiel, that there's going to be, these two are on the south, or the right hand, and then this one's going to be on the north, and then it says they also have this face of an eagle as well. So that's included in these four living creatures. Now, the way that people interpret that is that it's all on one creature, but I'm saying that they're actually dividing the creatures. He's looking at where the creatures are standing, and he's referring to where they are located, not where the faces are located on the living creatures. And you wouldn't get that from the King James, or actually most translations. You would just read it the way that it's written or translated. But this, we're going to see why this is and what's being described. Now, we did make reference to this, that this is a representation of the zodiac. Now, so what he sees is this chronology. Now, we know that astrology is the way that it's practiced in Babylon is for divination, and it's condemned in the Bible, right? That's because they're actually worshiping the stars. So they aren't just, looking at the stars, because that's astronomy, but they actually believe that these stars are gods. And when they make their images and their statues, they're representing what they see in the heavens. So they weren't worshiping these things on earth per se, when they would make a lion or a calf, when they would worship an ox or a calf or a bull. What they were worshiping was these deities in the sky, which they saw in the sky. And these are types of animals. The zodiac is this circle of animals in the sky. And the zodiac itself is where the sun travels, and the moon. They travel through the ecliptic. So this is a part of the sky, because there's all these different constellations, but we have 12 of them that the sun is going to pass through. And then the sun passes through these constellations at different times of the year or months. Now, there's of course 12, and they occur over this period of time, because there's 360 degrees in a circle. Each of these months gets this sign. And so this was developed by the Babylonians. At least we have a record of that. Whether how far back it goes, I'm not certain, but the Babylonians definitely originated this. And the names of these constellations, some of them have changed over time, but some of them stayed the same. So the lion Leo, which we now call it, is still called the lion, right? So Leo just means a lion. And then Taurus, which is a bull. So we got this here, Taurus, that has stayed the same. And now this one here on the south, this man, this is Aquarius. So this is the one with the man with the pitcher of water. So this is referring to the man. Now this one here, the serpent or the eagle, we now know as the scorpion. So that's Scorpio. But in ancient times, it was either the serpent or the eagle that was being represented on the Babylonian system. And some say even an eagle with a serpent in its mouth. So we have these constellations, and the question is, why are they here? Because God is condemning astrology, and yet there's this connection between what God is showing in Ezekiel and in Revelation, that to the contemporary reader, they would have recognized as referring to the sky or the constellations in the sky. And these primary constellations, and I'm not an expert on astrology or how the zodiac works. So I actually had it on my other computer. If I could just bring it up here, zodiac signs. And in the way that they go, this is what I need. So it's when these are placed within the year that we need to look at. Now these change over time slightly because of the precession of the equinox, and that has to do with the way that the relationship to the stars compared to the sun and the orbit of the planets. So there's this change, this precession of the equinoxes, which I'm not going to explain, but it does change over time, and it has drifted over time from the time that it first came. And I can't remember how much it drifts every 1,000 years. I read about it, but it drifts. And we can see that Taurus is from April 21st to May 20th. So it's not starting right at the beginning of our months. It starts, around the 20th, or 23rd, 22nd, 20th, so it's wrapped and ends about that time. But we can see the spacing of these if we go to Taurus. So Taurus here is the ox. This would be in the spring. And then you're going to go to Leo. This is over here. And then you're going to have Scorpios up here. And then Aquarius is down here, right? So in trying to understand this, I still don't know if I fully understand what is being represented here. But we have, in the way that he sees it, he sees these two on the south, right? So he sees the man and the lion standing on his right side, or which is on the south. And then he's going to see this ox on the left side. And then he says there's also an eagle. That one has the face of an eagle. And he doesn't say where it's standing. Now, I just, have a thought that comes to mind that of what he's seeing in vision. If it's the sky, this could be describing the time that he's in. And so I have to look into that. It's just a thought that came to my mind. And the reason why this comes to mind is when I was studying the chronology of the Exodus, I read from an Egyptologist who used to be a Jehovah's Witness. He's not anymore, but he still has a lot of their teachings. A guy named Gerard Gerteau. And he's not a Jehovah's Witness because as he studied the chronology of the Babylonian captivity and so forth, he came to recognize that the Jehovah's Witnesses were incorrect regarding the timing of the Babylonian captivity, which was important for their 2520 that they start with the Babylonian captivity. So he ended up rejecting some of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses teach. But he still has the name of God stuff and all these different things. But he's an Egyptologist, and he has his master's, and he's French. He's from France. But anyway, he's also an astronomer. And what he did is he was studying and he reads Egyptian, so the Egyptian hieroglyphics and the written language. And he was studying when you have a tomb, and you're buried, on the ceiling of the tomb, and this is going to be really relevant as we start to go through Ezekiel. So some of these things I'm going through, I'm not really explaining why we're studying them, but we'll see why, because Ezekiel is a condemnation of this false worship, and it addresses this false worship all through it, with the pagan nations and with God's people. But anyway, on the tomb would have these representations of these gods, and you would have some of these sort of angels, and you would have these gods, and they're arranged in a funny way. They weren't arranged like you would see the sky, but what they are is a symbolic representation of the sky, and it would actually represent the date that person died. So the day that person died is represented on the ceiling of the tomb in a symbolic way. So, so when you would look at, let's say, a constellation, I mean, they wouldn't put the little dots for the constellations or for their gods, but they would put them in a certain arrangement. So they would have a picture of their god, and he would be bigger or smaller. They'd have different size or different features regarding these things, and you could interpret these things so that you know what the date is. And so he used these tombs to actually date these kings, and the things they align perfectly with the Bible. So it's a very interesting study, and obviously we don't have time to go into this. But what I'm wondering is, when Ezekiel's in vision on the 5th day of the 4th month, maybe, and I'm just guessing here because I haven't looked at it, but maybe what he's seeing is he's seeing the sky in a symbolic representation to actually, that lines up with the time of year that he's at. So, and now when we talk about the north and the south, so when we talk about, and I hope people are following what I'm saying, because this took me quite a while to understand, and I'm not sure I completely understand it. But let's go to Ecclesiastes. So I'm going to share the screen again. Chapter 1, and in verses 5 and 6. And of course, I love the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a fantastic book. There's lots of information in it, lots of interesting things in it. And it's talking about this cycle of things that happen. And actually, let's just go right from the beginning. So the words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So this is Solomon writing in the style of the day for wisdom literature, though he turns these things on their head. That is, he presenting it from a biblical perspective. He was a learned man, wise in all the knowledge that was around him, and so he's writing in this style. But he takes a different look at things than the pagan religions would, though he had probably at one time was involved in it, because we know he married all these strange wives or foreign wives that influenced him. But this is in his later part of his life. And he says, what profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? So one of the things is this expression, under the sun. So I believe that the word sun is mentioned more time in Ecclesiastes than any other book. I think it's 34 or 35 times. So Shemesh is the Hebrew name for sun. And so anyway, he's talking about this labor under the sun, or this labor, this work that man has done, and that it's to no profit. And then he describes something. He says, one generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. Now, this word generation here just means a revolution or rotation. So he could be referring, of course, to a generation of people, because that word can be used in that way. But in the context here, it seems that he's actually talking about the day. One day passeth and another day cometh. But the earth abideth forever. And this idea is that the earth is still. Now, I'm not using like a flat earth theory or something, but from the perspective of a man, from our perspective, from relative to everything else, we see the days go by, but the earth standing still. That is, we're still here, but there's something happening in the heavens, which is this rotation that we see. And the sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and it hasteth to the place where he arose. And the wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again, according to his circuits. Now, if you remember from yesterday, we had read from Enoch 72. And in Enoch 72, It talks about the courses of the luminaries of the heaven, which is the sun and the moon, and the courses of the way that they travel through the sky. And it talks about these laws. And it says, this is the first law of luminaries. The luminary the sun has is rising in the eastern portals of the heaven, and it's setting in the western portals of the heaven. And I saw 6 portals in which this sun rises, the 6 portals in which the sun sets, and the moon rises and sets in these portals, and the leaders of the stars whom they lead, 6 in the east and 6 in the west, following each other accurately corresponding order. Also many windows to the right and the left of these portals. And first there goes forth the great luminary, the sun, and his circumference is like the circumference of the heaven. And he is quite filled with illuminating and heating fire. And the chariot on which he ascends, the wind drives, and the sun goes down from heaven and returns through the north in order to reach the east, and is so guided when he comes to the appropriate portal and shines in the face of the heaven. And in this way, he rises in the first month in the great portal, which is the 4th, those 6 portals in the cast. And in that 4th portal from which the sun rises in the first month are 12 window openings from which proceed a flame when they are opened in their season. And when the sun rises in the heaven, he comes forth through the 4th portal 30 mornings in succession, and sets accurately in the 4th portal in the west heaven. And during this period, the day becomes longer and the nightly shorter to the 30th morning. And on that day, the day is longer than the night by 1/9 part. And of course, I could go on reading this, but you can see, I hope, right away that we have some interesting details that we can apply here. So I'm going to ask the question, what is the north? Where does the sun, when the sun's in the north, where is it according to this? What I read. Because the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, but when it's in the north, where is it? I don't know if anybody caught it.
Alaska can confuse you.
Okay, so when it's in the north, it's when you can't see it. So one of the things about the north is it's when you can't see it. Now, so when we have this this description, and I still don't know how to do it and how to explain it. And I'm just looking here right now at the way that these go. So I'm gonna put this up on the board. So over here we have the East and Leo, and right now we know that this would go from presently from July 23rd to August 22nd. So this is what we call Leo, right? And then we have this ox or Taurus, and this would be from April 21st to May 20th. And then we're going to have Aquarius is January 20th to February 19th. And then we have this Scorpio is October 23rd to November 22nd. So October 23rd, and so this is Scorpio. November 22nd. Okay, so when he talks about these directions, north and south, or west and to the left, and I'm just kind of trying to think this through and visualize it. We know that he's going to see. Let's go back to Ezekiel. And I hope I'm not losing people with this, because this is rather obscure, but I think there's something that can be learned here. So I'll share my screen. So he says, and the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side. So the face of the man and the face of the lion is on the right side. So that's here. So this is on the south, right? That's what he's saying. This is on the right side or the south. And then it says, and they had the face of the ox on the left side. So the left side is the north. And they also had the face of an eagle. So if Ezekiel, and I'm still trying to visualize this in my mind, is seeing a representation of the sky, this could be the sky at the time that he is, or it could be something something in the future. You know, I'm not certain. But if something's in the south, those would be in the time that we can see things, right? Now, we have this here in this way. This is not the way that if we were to go through the constellations, they don't go in this order. You can see that you're going to have this part here. This is the summer. This is late summer. This is late spring. This would be late winter, and this would be late fall. I guess is the way we could look at it. But he's going to see these two, the winter and the summer. He's going to see on the right side, which is the south. And then he's going to see this on the left side, which is the north. And then he just says that there's also this eagle. So I'm not sure what that means yet. So, you know, we're kind of studying this together. But I want people to sort of think about this. Oh, and I was going to ask people at the beginning, before we got into all this, if people had a chance to read over some of the information that we had, some of the notes. I know people had read over, some people had read over the Ellen White statement, chapter 91 from 5 Testimonies, which the comments that we got that people said is, this definitely sounds like the time we're in. So it's talking about the time we're in. And, but I want people to read over these things and to think about these things and to make comments about this part of the zodiac, because I'm not sure what it means completely. But I do believe this is the zodiac. So why it's divided in this way, I don't know. And maybe we will figure that out. Maybe we won't, because not everything's meant to be understood now. So any thoughts on this at this point? Whether, you know, this is making sense what I'm doing, whether this is helpful in understanding Ezekiel at this point, do you think it is? Or it's just confusion?
There's a lot to consider within this part of the chapter.
Yeah. And it's been a big mystery for a lot of years, for a lot of people. And I'm not a speculative type of person, right? So I'm not a person who likes guessing. You know, I want something that's solid.
This has also been the one book that is the least referenced within the corporate church by any of their pastors, because they really don't want to have to struggle and apply themselves with what Ezekiel was addressing.
Yes, and another interesting point about it, though, is, you know, we study the book of Revelation, and yet we see a very similar scene in Revelation chapter 4. And so there might be mention about it sometime in a commentary, but basically they just sort of brush it aside. They don't try to understand. You know, so there's that aspect. But even like Ezekiel chapter 4, you know, we will quote that passage as a day for a year, but we never make an application of Ezekiel's prophecy. We don't try to understand it. We don't try to interpret it or place it. And even when we study Ezekiel in the Sabbath school quarterly, we don't really do it much justice. Ezekiel is we try to take some more devotional lessons from it. But as a book of prophecy, very little is really addressed. So I think there's some things here that we've probably missed, and I don't know what it means, right? So all I'm doing is pointing out the details of what I think is happening, and that we can see that they're going to group this this south, which is basically the winter, and the summer. They're going to place them on the right side or on the south side, and I'm not sure what that means. And then they're going to place the spring on the north side or the left side, and then they're just going to say that there's also, one of them has a face of it, the eagle. There's that one's there as well, but it's not placed. It's not placed whether it's right. Now maybe it's seen in the center, and so the first idea I had of it was that we're looking at this picture this way. So he's looking at let's say this is how it's laid out, and he sees here, he sees these two on this side of him, and he sees this one on the other side of him, and then he just sees the eagle over here. And you know, whether that's what's actually occurring or not, I don't know. Now, when I dealt with the sanctuary here, I don't know if people notice this, but this is the sanctuary in the middle, and I have the most holy place and the holy place. And when you look at these, we know that the way the sanctuary occurred is that the door of the sanctuary faced the east, so that when you're entering the sanctuary facing God, you have your back to the east or to the rising sun. And this was intentional, I believe, on the part of God, as a witness against sun worship. So at the time that this was made, sun worship obviously existed at the time that God created the sanctuary. But we know in Ezekiel chapter 8, when we get there, that they're going to have their backs to the door of the temple, and they're going to be worshiping the rising sun in the east. That's one of the things Ezekiel's going to see. So that's why I drew it this way. And I don't know if people would have noticed that right away. And I did it really without thinking. Now, on the sides of the north, you're going to have the table of showbread. And then on the south, you're going to have the golden lampstand. Right? And when you think about this, the right side is the north. This is in relationship to the sanctuary. So we would think, so they have the right side as the south, pardon me. So in relationship to the sanctuary, if you have the right side being the south, this would be you looking this way out of the sanctuary. Does that make sense? Because the north is here, and if we say the north is the left side, because that's what they said, the north is the left side. So the left side is on the north, and the right side is on the south, which would be somebody facing out of the sanctuary. So I'm not sure the significance of that. I kind of actually wish it was the other way around, so that when you're going in, the south would be on the left, and the right side would be the north. But it's the opposite way in Hebrew as far as the word south applies to the right hand, and the word left or the word north applies to the left hand. Is that making sense? You know, so there's some details here, and I know that, you know, I've worked them out slowly. So to kind of get your mind around this, I didn't send you stuff yesterday. I was too busy. Because I ended up going to town, but so I'm going to try to send some stuff, but I want to get few more things together for you to look at to try to sort this out. But if we look at this situation, it just tells me that he's in a certain location. And now the other thing has to do with these constellations themselves. So when we look at the constellations in the sky, they're not laid out this way, as I said. well, obviously the constellations don't go around in a circle like this. They actually go across in what we call the ecliptic. So they move through this ecliptic. And there is this thing called the Enochian Zodiac that some people have referenced based upon the book of Enoch and trying to understand the zodiac from like chapter 72 that I was reading, and trying to understand how he's describing this, the zodiac. And he's describing these portals or these gates, and that there's 12 of them. And these would refer to all the 12 signs of the zodiac. And that there's 6, if we go back there. This was some of the information. We're going to go back here. When he says here, 6 on the east and 6 on the west, and all following each other accurately corresponding order. Now, to try to understand what he means by 6 on the east and 6 on the west, you know, we know that the signs of the zodiac, these are called, because somebody sent me a note. So we have, in astrology, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius are called fixed signs. Taurus, the 2nd, earth; Leo, the 5th, fire; Scorpio, the 8th, water; and Aquarius, the 11th, air. All nonsense, but may uncover some mysteries. So yes, obviously this is nonsense. But these are the fixed signs. So that's true in Babylonian astrology as well. And also there's some similarity to the medicine wheel as well. So these different cultures have this idea of this circle and this cycle of things. And what they do is they end up worshiping it. But there's a truth behind it, and that truth is that we have this sky, and God created the sky to be for signs, for seasons, for days and years, and yet that's been perverted. So we know that it's been used to worship these gods. And so God obviously created the sky for a purpose, and he references it here in Ezekiel and in Revelation chapter 4. And you see these creatures. Now, one of the things about this, and we're going to try to study this a bit more tomorrow, because we're going to look at, when we start to get into the scroll that he's going to have to eat, we're going to see that there's a parallel there to the scroll in Revelation. And we're going to look at what that scroll is. And we did look at that on Friday, but we're going to look at it in more detail tomorrow. And we're going to try to understand what this is talking about. Now, one of the things about the scroll, and so I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit and just telling you where my mind is going, is that this scroll is about prophecy. And it's about all of the events that happen from the beginning of the world to the end. And if we look at the sky, it testifies of those things based upon chronology. So I'm making a connection with Ezekiel here in Ezekiel chapter 1, that what God is showing is that he's in control of events. And the sky is not in control of events. That is, we're not using the sky or using the stars, because they're not gods, to direct our lives. We're not looking to those gods. We're not appeasing them. We're not worshiping them to try to find out our purposes and our goals and our meaning in life. Instead, we look to God, because God is the one who's in control of the sky. And God has created these things to be a witness of his godship, of his control, the fact that he's a creator. And when we look at prophecy and time prophecy, when Jesus says, I've told you these things before they come to pass, that when they come to pass, you may believe that I am he. So God is in control of prophecy. We see this in the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, he calls in his magicians and his astrologers and his sorcerers and the Chaldeans, all these different people who have these divination arts to try to interpret his dream, to try to even tell him what his dream is. in the first instance. And of course, they're using this astrology and all these different divination arts, but they can't tell him what they don't know. They don't know what his dream was. Now, when Daniel comes in, of course, he directs to the fact that he didn't find these things out himself, that only God knows those things. So he points them to God, and that God is in control of the nations. So while Nebuchadnezzar may feel that he's this king and he's connected to the gods, and he's the head of gold, still, God is the one who sets up kings and takes down kings. That's not the sky. These astrologers and these sorcerers and these magicians and the Chaldeans, these learned people who study all these documents, who do all this mathematics and try to figure things out, they don't know, because God only knows. Now, so we're gonna see as we go through Ezekiel. So this is where my mind has gone. That when we deal with this scroll is a book of prophecy, and it's about time prophecy. And we're going to see that when we get to Revelation, because it's going to deal with the book of Daniel, and we're going to see that Daniel is about time prophecies. And God is showing that he's in control of all these events. So the purpose, at least as far as I can see here in Ezekiel chapter 1, is to make a statement about the sky, about the zodiac, and when we go to this story, of course, how the camp is laid out in this way, and then it has these symbols of the zodiac, and then we can see that Ezekiel looks at this from a perspective which I'm not sure how to interpret, even if it is a representation of a date or a time of year that's being represented. I don't know how to interpret that, because he's going to be in, when he's giving that. Now, of course, this is our Gregorian calendar, so it's a little bit different than the Julian calendar. And what I need to spend some time doing is I have to go back and figure out where in his time the zodiac would have lined up, because that's where it lines up now. But in his time, it would be different. So I'm going to have to figure some of that things out. It might not be that much different. I can't remember how much it drifts. But anyway, this to me is what's happening in Ezekiel chapter 1, is that we're seeing these things. Now, as far as these creatures, there is this suggestion from ancient drawings and ancient descriptions that the way that they looked at these zodiac, these fixed, the fixed constellations, the fixed signs of the zodiac, that they were on this circle or this wheel, and in these different corners, and they turn this wheel, right? And the sun is in the center of this wheel. Now, in studying the Mayan calendar has this type of idea where there's this big wheel, which has 365 gears in it. There's these spokes in this. And then you have this other wheel that has, can't remember how many days it has. Oh no, this one has more. This one has 365, and then there's another one in the center. So you've got this wheel, and then you have this other wheel within this wheel. And there's a similar idea about this sign of the zodiac, that there's this representation, a symbolic representation of a calendar that is circular. And we know that, of course, the question, why is a clock circular? We just kind of take it for granted. Clocks are circular, and it probably has something to do with the machines, that the workings of a clock, and it's easy to keep time in a circular manner, and so forth. But the thing is, time was considered circular for a number of reasons. One is a sundial represents a circle, because the sky is a circle, and everything moves in a circle, and it moves in these cycles or rotations. So we tend to think of time as linear, as in a line. And of course, God's given us that to do as far as drawing things on a line from here to there. to order things on a line. That's what we do. But the ancients never thought of time as a line. That is, they didn't think of a year as going in a straight line. They thought of it as going in a circle, but it's going to return again. And that's why the spring is called the return of the year. And the fall is called the head of the year, because you would have your time go in a circle like this. You would start here. This would be the head of the year. It comes around and it returns again. And this would be the spring. So this would be the fall and this would be the spring. That's how you would represent a year. That's how you would think of it. So, I don't have all the answers here, but I want to try to give people assignments, or I want people at least to volunteer for assignments a little bit. And so some of these things, I don't think all of us can study all these things out. I can't, I've been reading lots, but that becomes a bit of a rabbit hole sometimes, because one thing I read leads to another. So I've been studying calendars, ancient, they've got a really good paper on ancient calendars, on the biblical calendar from a really good biblical perspective. A lot of stuff that I've reviewed before. So I had some information from here, but you start reading these things. And so, I get very involved in reading different things that don't necessarily relate to the study of Ezekiel. But if people could email me, and you don't have to be somebody who's particularly a part of this class all the time, but anybody watching the video who has some interest in looking into this a bit more. And I would be happy for somebody to do a study on this. And what I want to see happen as we go through Ezekiel is that I'm not expecting people to take over a whole study. But if somebody has some particular point they want to study, it would be nice to have people present, a 15-minute study, a half an hour study on some particular point, whatever you think you need. Now, of course, if a person isn't comfortable presenting, they don't have to. You can still do a study and just send me a write-up on it, and I can basically read it if you want as well. And I know that takes time, but that's what I'd like to see as we progress through the book of Ezekiel. So I would like somebody, to sort of volunteer to look into this part of this a bit more. Because I don't necessarily want to look at it in too much more detail than I have, but it would be nice if somebody else could maybe find out more about this zodiac, the zodiac of Enoch, and maybe, and that whether that really applies or not, or just more evidence about how the camp was laid out and whether these banners, the way we have them laid out, is correct. Because, I just got this stuff from online sources and didn't spend a lot of time on it. So it's just some ideas. Now, wow, time's going by pretty quick. So we got about a half an hour or so. Okay, let's go to Ezekiel. Let's read a bit more here. And so we basically got to verse 10 as far as analyzing this. So for as the likeness of the faces, they formed the face of a man, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left, and they formed also the face of an eagle. So it makes it sound like that each of these had these four faces. I'm taking the position that they don't. Thus were their faces, their wings were stretched upward, two wings on every one were joined one to another. Oh, this is the other point. It's going to talk about their rings. So let's go and read what this is talking about. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and like the appearance of lamps. It went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. And the living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning. Now, trying to understand what this is about, I mean, obviously we have this vision or visual way of looking at this vision. We see these lamps, but we're not really sure what it is he's describing. You know, we know there's some brightness. They're very bright and they're moving about very quickly, and they have the appearance of a flash of lightning. So, you know, so there's something happening that he's seeing in this movement. Now, as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel upon the earth by the living creatures. Now it says with his four faces. So what this is describing, the way that people look at it, is that this is a wheel that's touching upon the earth, and there's these four creatures with their four faces. So the four different faces on each of the different creatures. And so this wheel is touching upon the earth at some point. And what that means, I'm not sure, but we know that this is connected to earth, and we're going to see that this wheel is going to reach up very, very high. So it reaches up to the heavens. So it's somehow a connection between heaven and earth in some way. And then in verse 16, it says, the appearance of the wheels and their work was like to the color of beryl, and they four had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as if it were the wheel in the middle of a wheel. So I talked about this idea of the wheel within the wheel. Now, the way that I think of it is like a timepiece. Excuse me. Because when we look at a clock, or we would see these wheels within wheels. Now, these could be referring to cycles within cycles. So we have all these different cycles of the sky. We have the cycle of the day, the cycle of the month, the cycle of the year. And it could be referring to that. Because what we're seeing in vision is symbolic. It's not necessarily literal, though it may have some literal aspects to it. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went with them. And when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, okay, I got to go back here. So verse 17, and when they went upon their four sides, and they turned not when they went. So to me, this is an idea of this is a wheel, and you have the four living creatures in a different part of the wheel, and that this wheel turns. And that the living creatures don't move, but the wheel itself moves. So the living creatures are rotating this wheel. But they stay on the same part of the wheel all the time. And as for their rings, now this word rings, you know, I never really had thought about it. I just thought it's like the rims of the wheel, and that's partially right. But it refers to a thing called a strake. So a strake in a wheel is a portion of a rim. So a straked wheel or a ring wheel has these different sections. You have these spokes that come up to this wheel. So I'm going to have to draw this. So when you have a wheel, like a spoked wheel, you got these spokes here, and they will have this wheel divided into sections. So it's not all just one piece of wood all the way around. And this thing here is called a ring or a strake, right? So this piece, this little portion, and so it is referring to the rim of the wheel. But that's what this ring is. It's this rim or strake. So there's parts of it. And they were so high that they were dreadful. And they were full of eyes round about them four. So it seems that there was four rings. So the way that I drawn that wheel, I think I put 6 or something. But it seems that there was 4 strakes. And if we're going to look at it this way, we could just say that this is a strake, this is a strake, and this is a strake. And there's 4 of them. So there's 4 portions of this ring. That's the way that I would, at least now looking at it, think about it based on what I understand about this wheel and how it's divided. So there's 4 of these rings, but there's not 4 wheels here. Now, wheel within a wheel, I'm not sure what that means, and different people have different ideas about it. But it says they were so high, they were dreadful. And this word dreadful, yeah, it's just full of fear, right? So it's scary, basically. And their rings, the top of the rim, a vault, arch of an eye, a brow. So the idea of these rings are these curved bits of the wheel, right? And they're full of eyes round about them. So this is just a regular word for eye. That's abara, that's 4. So they're in a circle. So that's the word says round about. That means they're in a circle. So there's eyes in a circle. Circuit, compass. So I'm not sure what that means as well, what these eyes are. Now, of course, when people try to describe these living creatures as literal creatures, you get some very strange drawings. But we know that there's obviously a symbolic representation here. So this is symbolically representing what we see in the zodiac, and this idea of this circle. So we know that a wheel within a wheel, that the different signs of the zodiac are going to come up at different times. The only thing that's confusing to me here is that we have Aquarius and Leo on this side, where, if you would, I would have thought that they would have been in the order that the zodiac would occur, but they're not. So they're not in order, and I'm not sure why that is. And again, it could have something to do with it describing. Now this here, of course, is the camp of Israel in the way that it's laid out. So when you're looking at the zodiac, as far as in this vision of Ezekiel, it's not giving you this description. So it's not laying it out this way. So you can't say that this is what Ezekiel is seeing. This is how it's divided. So I'm still trying to figure that out, if it relates to this, or if we would look at the zodiac itself, the sky itself. But anyway, and whether this is even correct, these banners, that's something that we don't know for certain. But I put it in there because it's something to understand. So in verse 19, it says, when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them, so that means the wheels are going because of the living creatures. They're causing these wheels to move. So the living creatures are causing these wheels to turn. That's the way it's describing this. And when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up lifted up. Whithersoever the spirit was to go, they went, and thither was their spirit to go. And the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. Now, I remember reading this as a child and not having any understanding of what this meant. And I pretty much feel much the same. We have this wind. So one of the things we saw in Enoch 72 is that the wind is connected to this. And we also saw it in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, where it talked about the sun moving, and then it talked about the wind. Now, this word spirit is just the word wind or breath. It's the same word. It's Hebrew, it's ruach. So you could call the wind a spirit. You would call your breath a spirit. And we have that word spirit in Latin, like inspiration, respiration. Spirit is part of that. And in Greek, it's pneuma, so like a pneumatic tire. So we have these words, pneuma, spirit, and ruach, these different languages. But they in all these languages, they mean the same thing. So the idea is that the breath is your spirit, and it's also a wind, right? So the wind is a type of breath. So somehow in the ancients, they believed that the wind controlled the movement of the stars and the sun. So they believed that the wind blew the sun around. And this seems kind of rather odd to us because we know that the sun's actually not moving, that the earth is just rotating. But that's how they would have understood it. They would have understood it in that way. Now, here it just uses the word spirit. And so the spirit blows the living creatures, and that causes these wheels to move. So that's the way I'm looking at this. And I'm not sure if that's helpful or what it really means. The likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creature was the color of the terrible crystal. Now, this kind of reminds me of the sea of glass that we get in Revelation 4 and 5 in relationship to the 144,000. But this is stretched up above them rather than something that they're standing on. And it's stretched forth over the heads above. And then under the firmament were their wings straight, and the one toward the other. Every one had two, which covered on this side, and every one had two, which covered on that side, their bodies. So they have two wings covering the sides of their bodies. Now everyone had two, which covered this side, and everyone had two, which covered that side. So they have two wings on each side, and two of the wings covered their bodies, and I would think two of the wings they flew with. And verse 24, and when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of great waters, as the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech, as the noise of an host. When they stood, they let down their wings. So obviously, there's this point. I'm just getting rid of this Hebrew numbers there. So they have their wings, and when they stand, they let down their wings. Now, again, trying to understand what this means, I'm not sure that I know what it means, but I can at least relate it to the understanding that people had about the sky, about the planets, about the zodiac, and how it operated in the time of Ezekiel. And so he's describing something that would be familiar with his readers. They're not going to be so puzzled as we are about it. They have a much better understanding of what he's talking about. And there was a voice from the firmament that was over their heads when they stood and had let down their wings. And so if this is talking about time, and we have this voice that's going to come from the firmament when they're going to let down their wings, this to me would be the voice of God. And this would be the end of time. That's the way I'm interpreting it. Whether that's correct or not, again, I don't like speculating on things, but that would need to make sense, this voice of God from heaven, and it would fit in with what we understand about the voice announcing the day and hour of Christ's return. And above the firmament that was over the heads was the likeness of a throne. So now we're going to see that this isn't just that we have this zodiac, but now we have somebody who's in control of this. And this is this voice. So this voice speaks, time stands still, and above the firmament over the head, there's this one, the likeness of the throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness of the appearance of a man above upon it. So this is obviously not referring to one of the creatures who has the appearance of a man. This is referring to Christ upon this throne. And I saw the color of amber as the appearance of a fire round about within it, from the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward. I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about it. As the appearance of the bow in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one that spake. So here, we obviously can go to Revelation chapter 4 again. And I think that this, once we look at the way that we've taken some time to do this, I think it is really clear that Christ is the one in control. And this voice from heaven has to be the voice of God, and the one seated upon the throne is Jesus coming back. So we know that we see this throne in heaven in Revelation chapter 4. Now this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. Now, when we think about a door open in heaven, we think about the heavenly sanctuary. So this is the door to the holy place that's being opened. Many Adventists just see a door being opened, they think it's the most holy. But this is referring to Christ's inauguration of the heavenly sanctuary at the beginning in the holy place. And we can see that when we look at it, the furniture that's here, because we saw it in Revelation chapter 1, we saw the golden candlesticks. And we're going to have those referenced here. But we're also going to see that there is another throne, and that throne is the table of showbread. All the furniture in the sanctuary is mentioned directly by name, but here in Revelation chapter 4, the table of showbread is not mentioned by name, but it tells you that it's the throne that is before the 7 lamps of fire. So you'll see what I mean. And the first voice which I heard was as it were a trumpet talking with me, which said, "Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter." And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. And round about the throne were 24 seats. And upon these seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. So here we have these 7 lamps of fire, which is the 7 golden candlestick, but they're just seen as 7 lamps of fire. And these are the 7 spirits of God, whatever that means, it's symbolic. But these are burning before the throne. So we have this throne. And on this throne, before the throne, there was a sea of glass like unto crystal. So this reminds us of that dreadful crystal. But here this sea of glass is in heaven. And so you could say that it's somewhat representative of that crystal or that firmament. And in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind. So again, you have beasts, 4 beasts, and they have eyes. So the other ones had eyes in Ezekiel as well. Now the first beast was like a lion, the second like a calf, the third had a face of a man, and the 4th beast was like a flying eagle. And if we're going to take these representations, we would see these as representations again of the zodiac, right? Because that's what they represent into the people at that time. But yet we're seeing something in heaven. So we're seeing the heavens, we're seeing these eyes or stars maybe, and we're seeing these creatures. And the 4 beasts which had each of them 6 wings about him, so these are seraphim, and they were full of eyes within, and they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which is and was and which is to come. And when those beasts give glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who liveth forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him that sat on the throne, and worship him that liveth forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. So we're going to look at Revelation 5 in connection with Ezekiel chapter 2. So you're going to see that there's, and chapter 3, so you're going to see there's some similarities that are going to happen here. Now, we all should be familiar with Revelation 5, but there's lots of things here because we know that this is about this book that's sealed with 7 seals. And I've made the case, and I'm going to have to demonstrate that tomorrow, that the one seated upon the throne with the book open in his hand is Christ in heaven, symbolically represented before before he becomes a man, before his incarnation, and that Christ can't open the book that's sealed with 7 seals if he remains in heaven. But Christ, who comes to earth as a man and dies for our sins, can open the book. And so it shows that the cross of Christ is the key that unlocks this book. And we're going to look at what this book is tomorrow. And we're going to deal with a lot of the different symbolism that's in Ezekiel regarding this. So I always feel, and I shouldn't always apologize, but it's just like there's so much here for me to try to, just present this in a really nice flow. It's too hard. I tend to jump around, so I apologize for that. But I want you to, before tomorrow, to read Revelation chapter 5 and Ezekiel chapter 2. But I'm going to go back to Ezekiel here briefly and look at chapter 2, just some of the things that he's going to talk about. So we know that he's going to send them to preach a message. And it is not a very, very long chapter. So I'm just going to read this part of it. I'm going to read chapter 2, but we won't really study it because there's a lot of detail here. You're going to read Ezekiel chapter 2 again. You're going to read Revelation chapter 5. And you're going to look at other places too, where it talks about this idea. But he said unto me, Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee. And the Spirit entered into me when he spake unto me, and set me upon my feet, that I heard him spake unto me. That I heard him that spake unto me. And he said unto me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that hath rebelled against me. And they and their fathers have transgressed against me, even unto this very day. For there are impudent children and stiff-necked. I do send thee unto them, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God. Now, when it talks about Israel here, it's not talking about northern Israel, because northern Israel doesn't exist. It's talking about Judah. And Ezekiel uses Israel and Judah interchangeably most of the time, unless he's specifically referring to the northern tribe, as he is in chapter 4. And they, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are a rebellious house, yet they shall know that there hath been a prophet among them. And thou, son of man, be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns be with thee, and thou dost dwell among scorpions. Be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. And thou shalt speak my words unto them, whether they will hear, or whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. But thou, son of man, hear what I say unto thee. Be not thou rebellious, like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth, and eat that I give thee. And when I looked, behold, a hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein. And he spread it before me, and it was written within and without, and there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe. So we can see when we read Revelation chapter 5, we have this book that's written within and without, sealed with 7 seals. So we're going to look at that relationship. So any thoughts on the study today? I know it's probably a lot of thoughts going through your mind, but whether you can formulate them and put them in, or any questions regarding what we've studied.
The picture of 4 beasts have shown up in Daniel, in Ezekiel, and in Revelation.
Yeah,
We applied time, events, and places to Daniel.
yeah,
I see time, events, and places here, and I see time, events, and places in Revelation, and I'll leave it at that.
okay. Yeah, one of the things we'll see as we go through Ezekiel, that obviously time is very important, and he's prophesying events, and he's dealing with locations. We're going to see that in Ezekiel. And one of the things that we've maintained in this message is that Ezekiel and snow both typify this movement, the time that we're in. And it's not, it's not well understood as within this message, really how Ezekiel does that. We know some aspects of it. We know there's his time prophecy that, and he begins prophesying on the 5th day of the 4th month, which is midnight. But we're going to see as we go through this that the relevance of the Sunday law message that we see in Daniel, Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, the relevance of the Sunday law that we see in Revelation 13, that we see, obviously, that this is about this false worship, and it's describing this in this way, and it's talking about time prophecies and time related to these things. Yet, we don't believe that we can predict events in the future in relation to time, but we can measure the time. We can know some things about the time, and we need to know, because once things occur, then these measurements of time become significant. And we can also see that God is in control of these events, and he's in control of time. And so he guides the constellation, the stars in their courses. God is the one that does that. Those are not gods who are moving about in some kind of dramatic play of representations of battles and conflicts and so forth between these various gods. Those are just stars that God's made. But God's in control of these things, and these things do testify as to the time. That is, these stars represent time. The sun and the moon obviously represent time because they're given for time. So that's the thing that we're going to try to understand from Ezekiel. Any other thoughts?
Ezekiel, the dead bodies that are scavenged in the summer and the winter, which indicates to me that something happened in the spring that we might look at.
Okay, I'm not sure what you mean, but any other thoughts on this?
One question.
Okay.
When you go back to, as you were referring to Ezekiel 1, verse 6,
Yeah.
It says there that these four have four wings, correct?
Yeah, they have four wings. What it says is in Hebrew, the way that I would translate it is they four each have faces. They four each have wings. That's the way that I would translate it.
Okay. So as you were instructing, we're going to need to be comparing this with Revelation 5, but if we also drop back just a little bit in Revelation 4,
Yeah.
specifically Revelation 4 verses 7 and 8,
Yeah.
is that also not saying that these beasts have six wings in the Greek?
Yeah. Right. So these ones are seraphim here in Revelation 4. They have six wings. In Ezekiel chapter 4, they're cherubim, and they have four wings. Ellen White refers to them as cherubim. If you read in that chapter from 5 Testimonies, chapter 91, she refers to them as cherubim. And so cherubim have four wings, and seraphim have six wings. So there's a difference here in Revelation in the number of wings.
So if we were looking at this, not setting aside Sister White, but looking at it strictly from the biblical standpoint,
Yeah.
if we jumped to a very oddly numbered verse, Ezekiel 25, verse 20, you'd have your confirmation again that these would have four wings, right?
Okay, Ezekiel, which one?
25:20.
Okay, 25:20.
Excuse me, Exodus.
Exodus,
25:20.
okay, yeah.
My fault.
Wondering, okay. So Exodus 25:20. And the cherubim shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces shall look one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubim be. Yeah. So yeah, when we read about the cherubim, they have 4 wings, right? So these are cherubim. Yeah, it's interesting it's in 25:20, but whether that's significant, probably is. But yeah, so there are these differences, and I don't know what they mean, right? So I'm not sure. Obviously we know cherubim are representations of something. Like, I don't know if anybody's actually seen a cherubim other than that it's represented, in the sanctuary. Because when we see angels, they can appear as men. Normally we'd think of angels have 2 wings. But cherubim and seraphim have 4 and 6. And I don't know if that's there's some literal creatures that exist that look like that, or that they actually are symbolic of something. And I know often we just think because, for instance, when Ellen White sees things in vision, she's describing something, what she sees. And so we think, well, that must be literally what exists. But I don't know that we could conceive, if we saw heaven the way it is, whether it's something that we could express in language, or whether God, in vision gives symbolic representations of things. And so one of the things we'll see in Ezekiel as we go through this, that there's a bunch of things happen, and we've sort of taken it as if what he's seeing is literally true, in how we would think of literal. That is, that was what was happening. He sees something, but we'll see in Ezekiel chapter 8, what he sees is a symbolic representation of something, not something that literally occurs. Certain parts of it may literally occur, but other parts of it are symbolic representations of things. So it doesn't mean that actually was happening, but it was happening in a symbolic way. And we can see that, Ezekiel, of course, is apocalyptic book like Daniel and Revelation. So we know Babylon is not a head of gold. When we say, the Babylon's a head of gold, we know that that's a symbol of something. But sometimes symbols can appear to be literal in that they can express that thing in a way that we can imagine it as literal. But we have to recognize that in apocalyptic literature like Revelation and Daniel, these things seen in vision are symbolic. The only thing is, when you look at Daniel, it's his last vision. He's describing things in a much more literal way than he does in the first part of his book. So we know that there can be things that parts of it are described as literal, but other parts are symbolic. And so we know that something should be taken as literal if it makes sense. But if we can't make sense of it as literal, we know that it's symbolic. And I think sometimes we just take things as literal when they actually are symbolic, because if we really thought about it, it wouldn't make sense as literal, but we just take it that way because it's not something we're familiar with. So I think there's a symbolic representation that you're seeing in John chapter 4 and 5. There's obviously symbolism there because Jesus is not a lamb that has 7 horns and 7 eyes. He just never takes on that form. So when John sees this lamb slain, as it had been slain with 7 horns and 7 eyes, it obviously can't be literally Christ. It doesn't literally look like that. So we have to be careful, and especially when you're seeing something that's shown in vision, whether you're going to take it as a literal thing or whether it's symbolizing something. And I take Ezekiel chapter 1 as symbolizing something, which is that God is in control of this zodiac, and he's using the signs and symbols that people in his day would understand. That God is in charge of these things, and that these gods do not control things. God is the one who does that. And that's why when we get to chapter 2 and we start to look at this warning that's going to be given, we will start to see that what Ezekiel is doing is attacking these false gods. That's how he's going to approach his warning. And it becomes much more clear that you see this contrast between false worship and true worship. Okay, so I know I don't want to go too long. It's 9 o'clock, so we're going to close with prayer. And there's definitely a number of things that we can obviously study out. We can try to study these things out before tomorrow. But the plan is, so today's Tuesday, I want to try to get through chapter 2 and chapter 3 in the next 2 days. I'm not going to necessarily say that I'm going to get one in each day, but I'm going to try to get through those 2 chapters in the next 2 days. And then, of course, we're going to have this Friday night study, and then Sabbath I won't be having a study. And then Sunday, we're going to start on chapter 4. And we're gonna take our time going through Ezekiel chapter 4 and onward, just like we are now. But I'm gonna do definitely a really thorough job of a lot of details that I haven't addressed in public presentations. They may be in some of my papers, but there's even more details. And then I want people to give a thought to what things they want to study. And so you can always email and just say, I'm interested in studying this thing, but maybe I need some help. Give me some direction. Some of you may just independently go and study things. And even if two or three different people study something, that's great. Because that can they might come to the same conclusions from different, different people studying the same thing, coming to the same conclusions is really powerful. And they also might have complementary positions. They might have some different positions, but they might see things, or somebody may find something and it might show that what somebody else found wasn't correct, because we get a lot of information on the internet. So it can create some discussion. So right now, I have this plan for what we need to do for the next 2 and the beginning of next week. But my goal is, as time goes on, that we're going to not necessarily be doing it where I'm just going through this and breaking this down, that we're going to have people coming in, presenting different things, and we'll go back over things that need to be answered as we go through Ezekiel. So let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful once again. I know that there's too much for me to understand, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same way. We know that we've sought to understand these things. We know that you're in control of time. You're in control of the events in our lives, in the history of kings, of nations. And we know also that we have a message to give, and we're going to continue to study Ezekiel and understand that message. Help us, Lord, to have this burden of this responsibility, to take it upon ourselves with your help, knowing that we are just earthen vessels, that we're frail and faulty human beings. But we know, Lord, that your guidance can help in directing our efforts so that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we pray for each person, and we take up this responsibility to study and to show ourselves approved unto you. And we ask that you can continue to help us. Help all those who watch the videos as well on YouTube to study these things and to be assured and to share them. And I'm thankful, Lord, for all those that have told me that they're sharing these things to others. I know that there's a lot of materials I still need to prepare. I pray, Lord, that you can help me to prepare those materials and to prepare these studies each week, each day. Thank you for hearing our prayer. And we pray and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.